At 6 a.m., Russian command thought they had finally broken through the Ukrainian line. Just 72 hours later, 97% of a mechanized regiment was either dead, captured, or missing. Every tank gone. Every fighting vehicle burned. What started as an 8 kilometers advance turned into an 8 kilometers grave. Picture this, a tough spot on the Eastern Front, winter's chill, frozen ground, and low visibility. That morning, Russian forces kicked off what they believed would be a game-changing operation. A Russian mechanized regiment, about 1,900 soldiers strong, rolled out with 43 tanks and 50 infantry fighting vehicles, plus a bunch of support vehicles. The mission: break through Ukrainian defenses and push deep into enemy territory, setting the stage for bigger forces to follow. At first, everything seemed to go smoothly as the Russian armored units advanced under cover fire. Ukrainian forces faced little resistance at the start. Their positions were lightly held, with just some small arms fire and a few anti-tank shots. It didn't take long before they began pulling back. To the Russians, this looked chaotic. Positions were left empty, and everything went quiet. They saw it as a total collapse by mid-morning. Mechanized units pushed through what used to be the main Ukrainian defensive line, and they moved fast. Armor rolled along cleared paths, with infantry following closely behind. Drones showed hardly any enemy presence. By around 2 p.m., the regiment had advanced 8 kilometers past the original line, taking over abandoned Ukrainian positions. The regimental commander reported back that they'd breached the line, and it looked like Ukrainian resistance was falling apart. Orders came down to regroup, reorganize, and get ready to push forward. The regiment was set for what the Russians called deep exploitation, aiming to hit the enemy's rear and mess with their logistics and command. From their viewpoint, the operation hit its goals in less than a day. But what they missed was that Ukrainian forces hadn't crumbled. They had pulled back on purpose. Doctrine in this sector had been developed over months of combat. Commanders recognized that rigid linear defense against Russian numerical and artillery superiority often resulted in unfavorable attrition. Holding every meter of ground invited destruction. Instead, Ukrainian forces adopted a defense-in-depth approach designed to absorb attacks, trade space for time, and exploit enemy overextension. Forward positions were intentionally lightly held. Their purpose was not to stop the assault, but to shape it. When Russian forces launched an attack, but Ukrainian defenders quickly engaged, then pulled back in an organized way. To the Russians, it looked like a full retreat, but really, the Ukrainians were moving back to strong positions, while their other units shifted sideways. As the Russian troops pushed deeper, the Ukrainians took up strategic spots along the corridor, setting up blocks on key routes. Units displaced forward. Drone reconnaissance assets repositioned to maintain continuous observation of the advancing Russian formation. By approximately 6 p.m. on day 1, the Russian regiment occupied an 8 kilometers deep salient roughly 3 kilometers wide. Ukrainian forces had sealed the corridor behind them. The regiment was now surrounded on 3 sides. The pocket had been created not through direct confrontation, but through maneuver. At this stage, Russian command still did not recognize the severity of the situation. The regiment reported consolidation and requested routine logistical resupply, fuel, ammunition, food, and medical supplies. Higher headquarters acknowledged the request and indicated that resupply convoys would be dispatched the following day. No immediate alarm was raised. At 2,300 hours on day 1, Ukrainian artillery initiated systematic fires on the pocket. These were not mass fires intended to annihilate the regiment immediately. They were harassment fires designed to deny rest, degrade morale, disrupt command and control, and prevent the establishment of effective defensive positions. High explosive rounds impacted Russian positions every 15 to 20 minutes. Illumination rounds lit the area repeatedly, denying darkness and concealment. Russian soldiers attempted to dig in, but frozen ground made entrenchment slow and shallow. Equipment maintenance was attempted under fire. Rest was impossible. By dawn of day 2, Russian troops had been under intermittent artillery fire for 8 consecutive hours. Sleep deprivation set in. Casualties accumulated gradually. Wounded from shrapnel, concussions from near misses, equipment damaged or disabled. The initial confidence of breakthrough success began to erode. Data opened with Russian command attempting to organize resupply operations. Fuel trucks, ammunition carriers, food supplies, and medical stores were loaded and dispatched toward the penetration corridor. Ukrainian forces observing all movement by drone engaged the convoys before they could reach the pocket. Anti-tank teams destroyed lead vehicles blocking routes. Artillery strikes followed, targeting halted convoys. Roads became kill zones. The resupply effort failed completely. No supplies reached the isolated regiment. Within the pocket, shortages became critical. Fuel reserves dwindled rapidly. Tanks and infantry fighting vehicles began shutting down engines to conserve remaining fuel. Ammunition stocks declined as Russian forces responded to Ukrainian probing attacks and artillery-directed engagements. Food was rationed. Medical supplies were insufficient to treat mounting casualties. At approximately 8 a.m. on day 2, Ukrainian forces executed precision artillery strikes against fuel vehicles that had accompanied the regiment into the pocket. Drone-guided fires destroyed 5 fuel trucks. With no fuel resupply and internal fuel reserves eliminated, Russian armored vehicles became immobile. Tanks could not maneuver. Infantry fighting vehicles could not reposition. The regiment was now static. At 11 a.m., Ukrainian artillery shifted to ammunition storage points within the pocket. Concentrations of stockpiled rounds were identified by drone surveillance. Precision fires detonated stored ammunition, producing secondary explosions that killed nearby soldiers and destroyed remaining combat supplies. Russian units were now critically low on ammunition. Radio intercepts from this period revealed deteriorating morale and increasing desperation. Russian officers reported the situation to higher command, requesting evacuation or immediate relief. The response from higher headquarters was to hold positions and await relief forces. Relief forces were discussed, but Ukrainian defenses along the penetration corridor were now firmly established. Breaking through would require a major offensive operation. One Russian command was not prepared to execute on short notice. The regiment remained isolated. Throughout day 2, Ukrainian forces tightened the encirclement. Additional units moved into blocking positions. Artillery fire increased in both intensity and accuracy. Drone surveillance tracked every movement within the pocket. No repositioning went unnoticed. Psychological operations began. Ukrainian drones dropped leaflets printed in Russian across the pocket. The message was direct. You are surrounded. Relief will not come. Surrender now or die. Instructions for surrendering safely were included along with assurances of proper treatment under the laws of war. Reactions among Russian soldiers varied. Some dismissed the leaflets as propaganda. Others recognized their accuracy. Officers ordered the leaflets collected and destroyed. Morale continued to erode. The night of day 2 marked a shift. Ukrainian artillery transitioned from harassment to destructive fires. Multiple batteries engaged the pocket simultaneously. High explosive rounds impacted continuously. Thermobaric munitions were employed, producing overpressure waves lethal to personnel in shallow cover and enclosed spaces. Casualties increased rapidly. Medical points within the pocket were overwhelmed. Wounded soldiers received minimal treatment. Many died from injuries that would have been survivable under normal medical conditions. Radio communications from the pocket grew increasingly desperate. Officers reported catastrophic losses, requested immediate evacuation, and demanded relief. Higher command offered reassurances, but provided no timeline. Dawn of day 3 revealed the extent of destruction. Buildings were damaged or destroyed. Vehicles were burned out or abandoned. Defensive positions were cratered. Bodies lay unburied. Recovery was impossible under constant fire. At 4 a.m. on day 3, Ukrainian forces launched a coordinated ground assault from 3 directions. These were fresh units that had not been degraded by the previous 72 hours of music combat. They attacked Russian positions that were exhausted, undersupplied, and disorganized. Russian resistance was fragmented. Ammunition shortages limited defensive fires. Soldiers were exhausted from prolonged sleep music deprivation. Many officers had been killed or wounded. Command and control had largely collapsed. Ukrainian forces advanced methodically, reducing positions one by one. Superior firepower, fresh manpower, and coordinated maneuver overwhelmed the remaining resistance. Russian units fell back, attempted to consolidate, then fell back again. The pocket contracted rapidly. At approximately 6 a.m., the regimental commander transmitted his final messages to higher headquarters. His command was effectively destroyed. Ammunition was nearly exhausted. Casualties were catastrophic. Further resistance would serve no military purpose. He requested permission to surrender to prevent further loss of life. Higher command initially denied the request, ordering continued resistance. The regimental commander transmitted again, stating that his soldiers were dying unnecessarily and that the regiment could not be saved. Permission was eventually granted. At 7:30 a.m., surrender terms were transmitted to Ukrainian forces. White flags appeared throughout the remaining Russian positions. Firing ceased. Ukrainian units moved in to secure prisoners. A total of 312 Russian soldiers surrendered. They were searched, processed, and evacuated to prisoner holding facilities. Among them were the regimental commander, a full colonel, along with 23 company and battalion level officers and technical specialists. The remaining 1,535 soldiers of the regiment were dead. Bodies covered the pocket, some killed by artillery, others during the final assault. Many died from wounds that became fatal due to lack of medical care. All 43 main battle tanks were destroyed or abandoned. Most burned out after running dry on fuel. Some were destroyed by direct Ukrainian fire. Several were abandoned intact when crews fled on foot. All 50 infantry fighting vehicles were destroyed, most by fire. Some showed penetration damage from anti-tank weapons. Others were immobilized and later destroyed by artillery. Supporting vehicles, logistics trucks, command vehicles, artillery pieces were destroyed or captured. Nothing functional remained of the regiment's equipment. Over subsequent days, the pocket was cleared, bodies were recovered. Equipment was assessed for intelligence exploitation or salvage. Defensive positions were re-established. Ukrainian forces reported significantly lower casualties. Exact figures remained classified, but estimates indicated fewer than 300 killed and wounded combined. The casualty exchange ratio heavily favored the defenders. The operation demonstrated disciplined execution of defense and depth doctrine. Ukrainian forces deliberately allowed penetration, sealed the corridor, and destroyed the isolated force through siege and maneuver, rather than frontal attrition. This required controlled withdrawal under pressure, precise coordination to close the pocket, and patience to degrade the enemy before committing ground forces. Russian operational failures were extensive. Intelligence misinterpreted deliberate withdrawal as collapse. Planning failed to secure flanks in the penetration. Logistics fell apart in the corridor. Command didn't see the encirclement coming in time to pull back. The psychological toll was huge. Russian prisoners felt totally abandoned. They were promised help that never showed up, and resupply was a no-show. Many think they were sacrificed to avoid admitting defeat. Russian military analysts even said that command sent a whole regiment to die instead of owning up to the trap. Families of the fallen are left in heartbreak. Questions started popping up about why the withdrawal wasn't approved, and why relief efforts weren't a priority. The economic hit was massive, with over $520 million in damaged gear. That includes 43 tanks worth about $8 million each, totaling around $344 million, plus 50 infantry fighting vehicles at $2 million each, adding another $14 million. And let's not forget the losses in supporting equipment. But the human cost, that was even worse. Out of around 1,900 soldiers, 1,535, the report showed that 312 were captured, 53 were missing and presumed dead, and the regiment was wiped out as a fighting force. It would take at least 6 to 12 months to rebuild, assuming they could get the personnel and gear they needed. The area, 8 kilometers deep and 3 kilometers wide, became known as a death trap among Russian troops. Morale plummeted and trust in command faded. For Ukrainian forces, this operation proved their tactics were spot on. Combat can be changed by smart moves and isolating the enemy instead of costly head-on fights. Just days ago, the ground was scarred from 72 hours of intense battle. The stats tell the story: 97% casualties, 43 tanks gone, 50 infantry vehicles destroyed, 312 prisoners taken, and an entire regiment wiped out in just 3 days. This is how modern warfare plays out: no rigid lines, just flexible strategies and careful weakening of the enemy. What started as an 8 kilometers gain turned into an 8 kilometers grave.